Bam. Hey, good morning, friends, neighbors, and countrymen. Got Jerry Ross, the old paratrooper here. Back to another Tales from the Patrol Base, which we haven't done in a little while, but we're getting back in the swing of things. I've got an old comrade in arms here from 3 Corps LRS and Texas Guard LRS, the illustrious Mark Blazek. Mark, damn glad to see you.
Good to see you. It's good to talk to you. It's been a minute.
Absolutely. It has been a while since we have walked a trail or jumped out of a plane together.
Yes,
Hey,
it has.
hey, it's just so we can kind of get a thing for our viewers, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you grew up, how you wound up joining the Army, and just this tell your tale, man.
Okay. I sorry, dog, go away. Uh, I grew up in Washington. Um, Started out in Cub Scouts as a Tiger to Eagle, ran cross country. Was always kind of fit, and I guess Boy Scouts builds that mentality a little bit. Um, Had a family history of it. My dad was in the Navy. Bunch of uncles served. The last people in my family to be in the Army, though, were World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my middle name is actually my dad's first name, and he was named after his uncle, who was killed September 11th of 44. He was an 11 Chuck, actually, he was a mortarman
Oh,
in France.
damn.
So I grew up with this whole family history of service. Both my grandpas were in the Coast Guard during the war, and my grandmas were riveting B-17s for Boeing, and yeah, I mean, I joined in '06, so mid-Iraq or like surge times. Obviously, nobody in my family wanted me to do it, and especially not as an
Yeah.
infantryman. Everybody tried to talk me out of it, but it was very much something that, being in the eighth grade when 9/11 happened, I felt very compelled to go. I enlisted on a option 40 contract, so I was trying to join Ranger Regiment. I felt compelled to go be the best and defend our country.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Great sentiment. We need more of it.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, so that's how I got into the Army. Joined in '06, immediately went to airborne school. Um, and then after Christmas Exodus, went to RIP. Um, and not for the first time in my career, wound up failing push-ups. And I'll be honest, it wasn't the 48th push-up. I
Hey,
was, sorry, what?
hey, it's not. It happens. You know.
Yeah, yeah. With Exodus, I got lazy. I didn't do anything, and like I said, I ran cross country. I am a distance runner. I can ruck. I can do a million sit-ups.
And
Um,
you're pretty fast, as I recall.
yes, but push-ups are not my thing. Never have been, and so slacking off those couple weeks, it got me. Um, and that was, I don't know if it was fortunate or unfortunate. Most of the guys I went to basic with, I think, actually made regiment.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I was set up to do it. I failed myself. It is what it is. Like I said, it wasn't the 48th push-up. I probably got to like 42 or something and was just done. Uh,
Yeah. You are 18 years old, man.
yeah, yeah. Uh, Missed opportunity. I kind of wonder what would have happened, but at the same time, I think I wound up being far more successful for things we'll discuss later because of the path I wound up taking. So, uh, to get to third Corps LRS, I wound up in worldwide, which, as anybody that's ever been there can tell you, is not the best place to be for 3 weeks while the Army is figuring out, where to put you. You
No.
spend all day, every day, either raking the sand or standing in formation, and it's absolutely terrible.
And beating yourself up.
Yeah, and just mentally assaulting yourself
Yeah.
for, yeah, I mean, I assume for most people, I know it was for me, it's really the first time in your life that you failed anything, and it's just kind of like it's a real kick in the face.
Well, we learn
Um,
more from our failures than we ever do from our successes.
that is true. That is true. And the opportunities that I wound up getting, not that you can't get them in regiment. If I had gone there the chances of me doing what I had actually done would be far lower.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unique, I think. But so I get to worldwide, and they have us in the rooms alphabetically. A's in one room with a B. There were a bunch of B's. There were multiple rooms of B's.
Hmm.
Our orders just all came out the same day, and the other three guys in my room all got the 173rd
Yeah.
in Italy, and I wound up with Fort Hood.
Oh.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was I was on orders to 3-1 infantry at Fort Hood when they were standing up Third Brigade. I
Yeah.
think they stood it up. It did like one tour, and then it got stood down or moved posts or whatever.
Yeah. I ran into those guys in Mosul. Yeah. I remember them. I
Wait,
don't.
no, 3-1 infantry, not 3-1 cav. It was 3-1
Oh, okay.
infantry at Fort Hood. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, so I went there on orders to that, and right before we got picked up by those guys, I think 7 or 8 of us were handed brand new orders um, to an MI brigade.
Oh, I bet your
And
head was spinning.
yeah, and well, I mean, we asked some of the NCOs that were around reception, I was like, what does this mean? They're like, oh, you're going to go be a PSD. So all of us now just want to end it because our infantry careers are basically over, we think.
Yeah.
Um, and upon showing up, it was really interesting. There were 3 Joes, 10 NCOs. The company wouldn't even actually stand up for another, I think, 13 months.
Hmm.
So there was 13 months where we were really in limbo, and the 504th at that time was deployed.
Yeah.
So we were on rear D standing up this company. Um, and we showed up too late in the afternoon. They couldn't get us barracks rooms. And these NCOs have been sitting around for like 2 months with no Joes, and they were like not about it. So it was like, okay, if we can't get them into the barracks, we know this is against reg. Like, who's got a couch? Who's got an extra room?
Yeah.
Like, they were getting ready to take us. And so this guy, I think that was the first experience I ever seen where NCOs were just willing to take care of soldiers for no reason. Like,
Yeah.
just, I mean, they wanted to stand up the company. They needed people, yada, yada, yada. They were willing to do whatever they had to do.
Hmm.
Um, the interesting thing was all those guys had come from 4th ID and 1st Cav. None of them were tabbed. None of them were airborne.
Hmm.
And within a month of us getting there, all of them would ultimately wind up getting kicked back to main post because the Army didn't want to take the time to train them.
Yeah. They didn't want to spend the
So,
money.
I mean, good lessons were learned. I think, at least for us Joes, from those guys, the things they taught us. I do hold it against the Army some ways. One of my first team leaders there, Christopher Rogers, ultimately did wind up going to 3-1
Mm.
and was killed in Afghanistan the next year. And I still kind of hate the Army for that. They could have just, I don't even care if he had a tab, send him to airborne school, he would have been fine. Good
Yeah.
leader.
Yeah.
So that was super unfortunate.
Yeah.
Um, and then basically as they filled the company, it was interesting how they did it. They were looking obviously for like high GT scores.
Mm.
So virtually everybody to come into the company, and they came in spurts. We'd get groups of 5 or whatever, and singles sometimes, but would all be either RIP failures or SWIC failures.
Yeah.
So everybody was either coming from Benning or Bragg. And it was an interesting group of people. We we trained really hard because
Mm.
we didn't know any better. Um, right after they'd kicked out all those NCOs, we got 2 more NCOs. And at that point, we only had 3 in the company who were even remotely qualified to be
Mm.
close to a LRSC company, but
Yeah.
by MTO or uh, tabs and badges, if you will.
Hmm.
Um, and 2 of those NCOs didn't really care about the rules. They
Hmm.
did, but they didn't. In a sense that we would not call range control. We'd just go out to a training area and do land nav.
Yeah.
One of them, Chris, had just come from. I'm going to try and stick to all first names as I tell this. There's a couple of names I'll say full, but to protect the guilty and the innocent.
Mm.
Um, he had just come from being an RI, and so he would pitch us. He pitched the op order class at Benning, So he would pitch us off orders
Yeah.
literally, I don't know, weekly or bi-weekly. And so we just all had that drummed into our head. It was such a boring class. You hate it. It's so stupid. But the repetition, like,
You
you
got it
know,
down.
yeah. It was as dumb as it seemed at the time, it wound up in retrospect being a really good training.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then ultimately that company was formed a lot by 82nd dudes. We got like a basically a cohort. It was like 30 guys
Yeah.
um, that had come back from Samara, had basically their 12 months dwell time, and then deployed with us.
Yeah.
So there was a ton of that influence, and then went to Iraq for the first one.
Wow. So I mean, so you were basically, you weren't just standing up a LRSC company. You were these a lot of these guys were learning LRSC as they went.
I think everyone was.
Yeah.
The only person who really we got some guys that were recce guys. Like we got a couple guys who for one reason or another were no longer in like the RRC pipeline. Like they
Yeah.
hadn't actually made it to RRC, but they did that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple of guys who'd worked battalion recce.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we had, I think the only person, if I remember right, who'd actually been in a LRS company before, and he'd actually been in 173rd LRS back in the day, was the Commo platoon sergeant. He was probably actually the most qualified person to be there because he kind of knew what right looked like,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was a huge benefit to us because our Commo section was really good. So
Yeah, I can imagine coming from 173rd LRS D, they're pretty sharp.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah. So you're there, you're a young private, you're absorbing all this stuff, and you're going for your first pump in Iraq.
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, at the time you don't know anything, so you don't know what's normal and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason that I don't know, the rotations had gotten off. So we went into Talafar, which is, I don't know, 35 miles west of Mosul,
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of sort of halfway between Mosul and the Syrian border. Um, at that point, Mosul was the hot spot. That's where it
Yep.
was popping at.
For
First Cav was there, and they were getting beat down. I mean,
when
AQI and ISI were taking it to them at that point.
Mosul went from being really quiet and nothing against the first Cav guys, but their leadership was not aggressive, and the bad guys took advantage of it.
I I don't know enough about it to comment on that. I mean, I've heard stories and whatnot, but yeah, it was interesting that like our brigade, which again being a military intelligence brigade, had responsibility for literally. I mean, again, this is a private's view, so maybe I'm wrong, but like 95% of the province.
Mm-hmm.
The 5% that wasn't us, there were two brigade combat teams controlling it, and it was strictly like Mosul and its suburbs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty crazy. We were lucky, uh, and we saw this in Afghanistan again. Same thing. They put us on the supply lines essentially, trying to do lethal interdiction, and there wasn't a whole lot going on. Like just like the Taliban later, ISI AQI was smart enough to they wanted to run things through there. They didn't want to cause problems. Um, and there were incidents, but not, it wasn't a daily thing. You didn't hear gunshots all the time. You weren't getting shot at constantly. So, um, by some standards, unlike a lot of those urban deployments, we had it really easy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, going back to what I was saying is we actually deployed 3 months before the brigade. For
Mm-hmm.
some reason, the LRS teams and the brigades were not synced up. And so um, we did a 12-month tour. They did a 12-month tour, but we actually went 3 months before them, and they came back 3 months after us.
Yeah.
So the first 3 months we were there, we were working for 525 after we're leaving Foxco. Um, we were there when 525 was told they couldn't wear their airborne patch anymore.
Yeah.
That was that was just weird. Like even to a private, like having kind of studied what I guess the army looks like in general, what patches look like when they took that tab off, it was like that's not right.
Yeah. I could
So
see some pissed off people too.
oh yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
So let's see. Yeah, it was interesting. So our first 3 months we were working under a different chain of command.
Mm,
Um, and that tour we were actually attached, well, after 525 left, we were Bravo 38th, but we were a separate company under the 163rd MI Battalion.
hmm.
This was before they had stood up the
The Cav Squadron, the Rista
the
Squadron.
ac- the actual Ristas, yeah. So we had no Cow Scouts, no nothing. It was just a company of infantrymen under,
A,
well,
a company of knuckle draggers with a whole bunch of MI folks surrounded.
we got a lot of details, let me tell you.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
All of the details.
Well,
Um, yeah, so it was, I don't know, that whole experience was really interesting. Um, we were we'd almost see this the second time too, except more extreme. You could look one direction, have the desert, and you could look the other direction, have mountains.
yeah.
So we kind of had different types of terrain that we were operating in. Most of our stuff was out in the desert. That was where, the supply lines were. They were trying to bring things in.
Mm.
Um, we did quite a few serve missions, um, some presence patrols, because obviously that's what you do with LRS, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but it was what I think is unique about LRS, and I suppose you only see this in long wartime. Like the LRP guys talk about it, and the books I've read and whatnot, and kind of what we saw where we would go out and it would be 7 days, 10 days. I think we did like one 14-day. But then you'd come back, first day you'd reset, and then you'd do precisely nothing for a week plus. Just sit in your chew and play video games, which, is pretty awesome. But it was one of those like feast or famine. It either really sucked or it was,
Good.
yeah, as good as you could possibly imagine sitting in the middle of nowhere in Iraq.
Mm.
So
Yeah. All right. So y'all came back from Iraq, and then did you start? I guess you started spinning up for an Afghan tour, or how'd that go?
we were super fortunate because the MI brigades were on a 2-year rotation.
Hmm.
So I think they had done a 1 year previously, and then this was kind of the end of the surge, Iraq surge working into the Afghan surge.
Hmm.
So it was what were the three active ones? 504, 525, and I think 201st, 201.
That sounds right.
Okay. Yeah, so when we relieved Foxco and 525, and then we were relieved by what would ultimately be, what are they called at that point?
They were I Corps. Were they I Corps?
There was I Corps, but I don't know if they were 338 or if they were three or yeah. Well, anyway, so we were relieved by 201, and then 525 went to Afghanistan. Then Spin Boldak, which is I would say southern Kandahar province, but it's actually kind of in the middle of it because of how it's shaped. But it's, let's say, a 45-minute drive south of Kandahar Airfield.
Yep.
Um, right. I mean, we're a couple miles from the border, the Shaman border crossing, which is the second most used border crossing in Afghanistan.
You've got
So
mountains, a lot of desert, and as I recall, there's one really big hill that you can see off looking into the distance.
there were actually quite a few hills. One of the unique
Yeah.
things about that place is it's
Yeah.
you look one way and you've got the Rajab Desert, or which translates to the red desert, literally red sand. You look
Mm.
the other direction and I mean, you're looking at the very first hills in the Hindu Kush.
Yeah.
And I mean, our base level, I want to say, was like 4,500 feet.
Again.
There, yeah, I mean, but I mean, if you think about it, you're looking at this mountain range, and it's not, I mean, it's not that tall. They're mountains, they're big. But you're looking at this mountain chain that, at some point, if you were to just follow it, you hit Mount Everest. Like, the farther north you go, just the more intimidating it gets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we climbed all of them at some point.
Yeah.
It was pretty miserable. But yeah, so we second time, same thing. We relieved 525, and Foxco, which at that point was being called, uh, that was Charlie 138, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting to like see some of the same guys again, the few that had stuck around. But with that 2 year break, I assume they had pretty much the same thing we did, which was almost complete turnover. We had, I think, only 11 guys that were, the OGs
Yeah.
that
I
had
remember
gone to
that.
Iraq that wound up um, also going to Afghanistan with us. So I know it was cool at that point because I was the oldest of the OGs. So
Yeah.
like I had this like claim to fame, that I was the guy that
So
had been there forever.
it's like I've been here the longest.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that where you had your? Because I remember you telling me a story about the B-1 bomber, or what was the
Oh,
the
well, yeah. So I remember like there's so many weird things that happened there. Um, we had all these named missions. Not obviously everything's got an operation mission, but like when we got back and realized if something really sucked, like if it was one of the worst moments of your life, we gave it a name. They all rhymed. We had the Dismal Draw, the Terrible Training Camp, the Weeping Wadi, the Erroneous Exfil, stuff like that. And prior to, we did a bunch of operations that were all 504th is the Viper Brigade. So Viper Strike 1 through, I don't know, we did 9,000 or whatever. I don't know, it was literally like, I think it went to 8 or 9, something like that. Um, and 3 wound up being what we called, that was Weeping Wadi, um, which actually wound up being pretty successful. But one of our preparatory missions for that, when we were setting in some unmanned ground sensors, uh, found ourselves in Overwatch position. I'm sitting next to one of the radio guys, and he air checks on for no reason. We didn't call him. There's nothing going on. We weren't worried about anything. But they were in our AO, checked in to see what was, if we needed anything, I guess. Um, and I don't remember exact. I think I just asked him like, "Oh, so what do we got?" Because we had a quite frequently it was the French that were overhead at that point. He's like, "No, actually, it's B1s." What? Isn't that a strategic bomber? Like they're not even. He's like, "No, I don't know either, but dude says he's a B1. He's got XYZ, whatever the inventory is. We need to drop." I was like, "Man, it's a shame we don't have anything to blow up right now because that's kind of
yeah.
that's kind of cool." Like it was, yeah. I have no idea how or why that happened, but he was like, "Yeah, it's
It's still
whatever,
pretty.
I
It's
guess."
still pretty cool to have a B-1 bomber and support.
Yeah,
It's like a friend of mine's team. They got in contact, and they actually had a B-52 in support of them. Didn't drop any bombs, but it didn't know fly by and scared the living crap out of everybody.
it happens. I still to this day. I mean, I guess I could call him and just ask him if he has any idea why or whatever, but I have no clue why or how that happened. I mean, it was
Yeah,
always, your typical F-16s or
yeah,
Mirage or, whatever.
A10 or something.
Yeah. Um, I was like, yeah, it's a B1. What?
Fucking
So
awesome.
yeah, that's cool, I guess.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, um, that tour is a lot different. We would frequently in Iraq go out to various cops um, that were either with the IA or um, like American cops within, IA compounds or whatever.
Mm.
Um, we did co-share a uh, checkpoint we had in Afghanistan, but it was weird when you compare our rotation the first time, where it was very much units would just go out and do their thing, come back, whatever. You kind of never knew who was where. When we were
Mhm.
in Afghanistan, we had this checkpoint we actually had to man, so that it was a weekly rotation. So every 3 weeks you were doing that. Then you essentially had a mission week and then like a rest week, and it was much more. It seemed much more regimented, I guess. We were sitting in this valley, probably I don't even know anymore. I don't. It seemed like it'd take forever to drive there, and I was driving lead. I was driving the mine roller, but it was just the softer. It takes forever to get through. I'd say it's probably 7 to 10 miles off of Highway 4, um, and we never really saw anything out there. It seemed like a complete waste of time. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea, but we manned that. We manned a OP that was on a mountain above us, um, and same thing. We pretty much never saw anything from out there.
Yeah.
Um, it was interesting. We did see some funny things from up there though. We watched a goat herder drive his goats over an IED. Um,
Okay. Little
just
blast.
turned around, they were all gone. Um, we'd done a presence patrol through a village, and it wasn't a presence patrol. We had not patrolled out from the cop at all that I'm aware of, and I don't think Fox really did either. It's just kind of holding a spot to observe. And we decided to walk through a village. I don't know if they'd gotten some sort of intel hit or whatever. And we did it kind of at twilight. We didn't make any secret of it. Um, we weren't being loud or anything, but these guys had no idea when we walked in there. I remember we're walking, single file. I've got the Valen. We're passing the mosque, and there's all these Afghans sitting there, smoking and joking, whatever, not paying any attention while we walk by them.
All of a sudden, the
And right, well, no, I guarantee you they didn't, because the PL, who's a couple behind me, turns to his terp and was like, "Hey, you want to talk to these guys?" And it was like the record scratch stop. Like everybody, they all looked up and were like, "Where the hell did you guys come from?" And like nobody ran, but everybody's like, "Oh, I have business. This is where I park my car," kind of thing. It was hilarious. But I didn't get to see this. We weren't at the patrol base at that point. They said an IED on the route we had taken to the base, and week and a half after that, one of the other platoons was out there when a camel walked over it, and yeah, or not camel. It's like
there was herds of camels around
maybe
Spin.
it was a camel. I was gonna say it was a donkey. I think it was a camel.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, I didn't personally observe that, but it very clearly, when it was pointed out to us where it blown up, it's like, yep, that's the exact route I took into the village last week.
Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah, they figured we were coming back.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and a lot of times, some of those places there's only one way in, one way out. So.
I mean, this was open ground. We could have done whatever we wanted. We pretty much walked straight to a corner of it and then traversed it left to right and then came back. So it was, like I said, we weren't hiding what we were doing.
Yeah.
They just weren't paying attention. They were caught by surprise because it was something we hadn't done.
Yeah.
It was probably 2, 3 months into the deployment. So I mean, they got lackadaisical, and
Yeah.
we showed up. So
Yeah. Well, you've had you're kind of an interesting developer. I think you were the only PFC in the Army who wasn't a rigger with military freefall wings.
specialists. I didn't go as a PFC.
Specialist. Okay.
Um, I can't necessarily prove that. And it did happen later. There were more that followed me. I was the first.
Yeah.
And again, I can't prove that I was the first. I did read all of the plaques and banners they had at Halo.
Mm.
Um, and I found a couple corporals, um, whether they were RC guys or where they came from, I don't know. So definitely not the first E4. And there were E3s in the class, but
Yeah.
they were guys in the PJ pipeline,
Yeah.
a SEAL, stuff like that. No, 11 Bravo was there was absolutely nobody.
Well, I mean
I do know.
if you're an 11 Bravo, the chances of you getting that slot for free fall is just yeah.
Yeah. Um, Actually, one of my ATLs who he hadn't been RI, but he'd been op for at Benning, managed to go before I did,
Oh wow.
and unfortunately had a safety violation
Hmm.
and got kicked out.
Well,
Um,
You did a lot of didn't you do a lot of skydiving before you went?
Yeah, so essentially what happened is with the standing up of the unit, um, I went to when I went to Hood, all of us kind of figured our jumping careers were over because 3 corps.
Yeah.
Um, and I when I got there within a couple of months, we were all itching to jump, and at that point we knew, okay, we're an LRSC unit, we're going to jump.
Yeah.
And people are telling us, we're too young to know any better. We're too young to know this is a pipe dream.
Yeah.
When we show up, one of the first things the NCOs say to us is, "You're going to Ranger school, you're going to Halo school, you're going to dive school, you're going to be Pathfinder, Jump Master, all this stuff," which obviously was not going to happen. But um, two of the guys, I hadn't thought of it. Two of the guys decided that they were going to go start skydiving to up their chances of going to Halo.
Yeah.
And one of the guys,
there was a time you could challenge the course if you were like a C license, or I can't remember what.
I used to know the answer to that. Yes, there was. I could have told you the requirements. I don't remember them anymore. That is, to the best of my knowledge, that's no longer a thing. But yeah, so these guys, Brian and Eric, were like, "Hey, let's go start skydiving." It's like, okay, fine, why not? And really got into it. Had my A license within probably 2 weekends or 3 weekends. Got my B license pretty quick. Like we started, I think, right around Memorial Day. And we were one of the guys, Eric, unfortunately passed away in a motorcycle accident about 3 months after we started. But me and the other guy, Brian, kept hammering it. And I mean, we were C license jumpers, I think, before we went to Iraq. So we had both. It was a gamble. I mean, we both fell in love with it. We were jumping a jump just because the people are great. It's an awesome hobby, and the ultimate goal was still get to Halo. So I had racked up all these jumps with the hope that if that day ever came, I could be like, "Yes, sir. Like this is as easy as it gets."
Yeah, I can get stable. I can do all the turns. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are differences. Jumping a rucksack is a completely different. I've never been a tandem master. I don't know. I assume it's kind of like that. I mean, it changes your center of gravity, your airflow. I mean, jumping is just like flying a plane or a helicopter. It's all about control surfaces. And so jumping a ruck very much changes that. And that took some getting used to, but it's not hard if you already have those skills. And I think I had like 250 jumps when I went. So, yeah, I tell people that's not a lot,
Compared
so many
to
people.
Army static line jumping, it is a lot, but it is in the skydiving not so much.
Yeah, in the skydiving world, I have a lot of friends that are approaching or over 10 grand.
Yeah.
Everybody that's working in the instructor world has to have at least 500. And as soon as they're an instructor, they're jumping multiple times a day. So the point where they hit $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 comes very quickly. Yeah. So I started jumping to hopefully someday get to, live the pipe dream. And then when I was in Iraq, reenlistment came up and they were reenlisting for an OML, which, never reenlist on a handshake, right?
Yeah.
I am the one success story. It actually worked out. And this is a part where I will name names because for whatever reason, leadership looked out to me. There's a bunch of other guys that are going to say leadership didn't look out for them. I would argue they didn't fight for it. As soon as
Hey, Mark, I tell you what, let's do here because we're under 5 minutes. I tell you what, let's do.
Okay.
Let's take a little bit of a break, and
Okay.
I'll reopen the call, and we'll just take it from military free fall, man.
Gotcha. Sounds good.
All right, love it. Give me just a few minutes, and I'll be right back with you.
All right.
All right, cool.
All right, bye.
Hey, what's up?
Hey,
Yeah.
He's really busy.